Most people assume kindness is what earns respect. Psychologically, that's not how it works. Research shows people respect strong boundaries far more than consistent generosity, and when yours are unclear, others don't just overlook them, they test them. Behavioral economics confirms it. Ambiguity invites probing. What most people never realize is that every relationship they're in is a quiet negotiation, and it starts with how you define your limits. Psychologists define boundaries as the limits, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral, that signal what a person needs, allows, and expects from others. In practical terms, boundaries are the invisible lines that help us separate our own feelings, thoughts, and responsibilities from those of the people around us. The concept first took shape in clinical family systems theory, where Dr. Murray Bowen described something called self-differentiation. This is the ability to hold on to your own sense of self, even while staying connected to others. On one end of the spectrum, a person may become so fused with those around them that their decisions and emotions blur together. On the other end, someone might cut themselves off entirely, creating a rigid wall that blocks connection. Most people fall somewhere between these extremes. Modern therapists and researchers often describe boundaries along a continuum with three main styles. Porous boundaries are loose and inconsistent, and people with this style tend to say yes too often, share too much, or struggle to ask for space. Rigid boundaries are the opposite, and these are the people who rarely let others in, keep their distance, and may come across as cold or unapproachable. Healthy boundaries strike a balance. They are clear and consistent, but flexible enough to allow closeness when it feels safe. A person with healthy boundaries is able to say no without guilt, and yes without feeling pressured. They can share appropriately, ask for what they need, and adjust their limits when circumstances change. Attachment theory helps explain how these boundary styles form. People who grew up with caregivers who were dependable and emotionally available often develop secure attachment. As adults, they are more likely to set and maintain healthy boundaries because they trust that relationships can handle honesty and difference. Those with anxious attachment may fear rejection, leading them to adopt porous boundaries, over-accommodating or people-pleasing to avoid conflict. Avoidant attachment, on the other hand, often results in rigid boundaries, with a strong preference for distance and self-reliance. These patterns play out in everyday life. The colleague who can refuse extra work calmly, the friend who feels compelled to answer every late-night message, or the partner who insists on strict privacy. Each style is a response to early experiences, but also a set of learned signals about what is safe and what is not. As the documentary continues, this working model of boundaries, porous, rigid, and healthy, will serve as the foundation for understanding how respect is built and maintained in every relationship. Number 17. Meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. Everyday social life is a series of subtle negotiations. When someone asks for a small favor, borrows a few minutes of your time, or nudges a rule just a little, they are often running a kind of low-cost probe. These minor requests carry little risk for the asker, but the response reveals a lot about where your boundaries actually lie. Expert 2 puts it simply: a probe is a low-stakes way to test how far someone's limits will bend. Social exchange theory explains why these probes are so common. People instinctively weigh the costs and benefits of pushing a little further. If a boundary is unclear or inconsistently enforced, the probe is more likely to succeed, and each success encourages larger asks down the line. This is not always malicious. Often, it is just the natural way humans map out what is possible in a relationship. Behavioral economics backs up this pattern. In classic ultimatum game experiments, one person proposes how to split a sum of money while the other accepts or rejects the offer. When the rules are clear and a fair limit is set, both sides tend to cooperate. But when boundaries are vague, unfair offers become more common, and trust quickly erodes. Trust games and public goods experiments show the same thing. People are more willing to cooperate with partners who signal strong, predictable boundaries. When limits are clear, the social cost of crossing them is obvious, so fewer people try. Low-cost probes do not just measure willingness, they shape the entire dynamic. If every small request is granted without question, the line between cooperation and exploitation starts to blur. But when someone calmly enforces a fair boundary, it sends a signal that is hard to ignore. Over time, this clarity makes relationships more stable and respectful, as both sides know what to expect. The hidden negotiation in these everyday moments is less about the ask itself and more about learning how much the other person values their own time, energy, and standards. Emotional exhaustion is often the silent cost of porous boundaries. In both clinical and workplace studies, people who struggle to say no or who habitually absorb others' needs show clear markers of burnout. The Maslach Burnout Inventory, widely used to measure this phenomenon, links high emotional labor with symptoms like chronic fatigue, cynicism, and reduced sense of accomplishment. Data from Differentiation of Self-Inventory Revised, DSIR. Studies reinforce this pattern. Individuals with low scores, meaning they have less ability to separate their own feelings and responsibilities from those of others, report higher emotional reactivity and greater psychological distress. The physiological impact is also measurable. Research connecting self-differentiation with stress markers shows that people with weaker boundaries experience higher perceived stress and, by extension, more frequent spikes in cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. While direct DSIR and cortisol studies are rare, related findings from the Daily Stress Inventory confirm that self-reported stress reliably predicts elevated cortisol on high-pressure days. Over time, this chronic activation of the stress response wears down both mental and physical resilience. The toll on productivity is visible in organizational data. Employees who routinely accept every request, whether from managers, colleagues, or clients, report more overtime hours, fewer periods of deep, focused work, and lower engagement on internal surveys. In one HR survey, 82% of workers at companies with vague or inconsistent boundary norms said they felt at risk of burnout. Firms that codified after-hours limits and made expectations explicit saw a 20% increase in productivity and a 15% drop in voluntary turnover within a year. The psychological cost is just as steep. When boundaries are unclear, resentment builds quietly. People begin to feel taken for granted, their contributions overlooked, and their energy depleted. The line between helpfulness and self-neglect blurs, making it harder to recover a sense of agency. Burnout, role creep, and emotional fatigue become the background noise of daily life, not just for individuals, but for entire teams and families. These consequences are not abstract. They show up in the data, in the clinic, and in the lived experience of anyone who has tried to be endlessly accommodating. Maya, a mid-level project manager, faced a familiar dilemma. Her supervisor asked her to add 2 more features to an already full sprint. Instead of absorbing the extra work, Maya responded with a measured email. She thanked her supervisor for the suggestions, explained that her 30-hour sprint capacity was fixed, and suggested prioritizing the highest impact features for this cycle. The outcome rippled through the team. Overtime hours dropped by nearly 20% over the next quarter, and after-hours emails became rare. Colleagues began to respect Maya's time, scheduling requests in advance and clarifying priorities. HR surveys captured a measurable uptick in both focus and morale. Ethan and Priya's friendship had settled into a pattern. Late-night texts from Ethan, often seeking reassurance or advice, and Priya always replying, even when exhausted. After a particularly draining week, Priya set a new standard. She let Ethan know she cared about him, but explained she needed evenings for rest. Calls, she said, would be welcome between 7 and 9 p.m. Anything urgent after that would wait until morning. The first week was awkward, but within a month, both reported feeling less fatigued. Their conversations grew more meaningful, and the friendship stayed close. Community data from similar cases show that scheduled availability boundaries reduce fatigue and preserve trust, with 68% of surveyed friends reporting improved satisfaction after a month. Lena and Marco, a couple juggling work and home life, struggled over the invisible burden of household planning. Lena felt overwhelmed managing appointments, meals, and reminders. In a therapy session, she voiced this using non-judgmental language. "When I handle the weekly schedule alone, I feel overloaded." She proposed a 10-minute Sunday check-in to divide tasks. 6 weeks later, their shared chore app reflected a 45% shift toward equal responsibility. Both partners reported higher satisfaction and more energy for each other, echoing findings from couples who redistribute tasks after boundary renegotiation. Expert 3, a therapist, demonstrates the principle behind these outcomes. State the limit clearly, describe the consequence calmly, and follow through without drama. Whether at work, with friends, or in love, this approach transforms self-respect into external respect. The line is drawn not to shut others out, but to show what you value, and that is what others learn to value too. In a world that rewards clarity, strong boundaries quietly signal self-respect and invite it from others. Today, research links boundary strength to lower burnout and deeper trust across relationships. The line you draw isn't just protection, it's an invitation to real connection. So, where do you stand?